Hey everyone, welcome to another session of Conversations with Courageous Cancer Warriors. And today we are going to be talking about money, financial planning, that is. So I would like to welcome Rachael Burns. She's a certified financial planner, and she's also a certified divorce financial analyst, and she's based out of Folsom, California. Rachael, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thanks for having me, Lori.
So we're really excited because, as you know, when you go through any trauma in life, so whether it's a divorce, a chronic illness like cancer, money is always a really touchy subject, and it's a really important one. So I'd love to hear from you, like what got you started on this journey of yours?
Yeah. So like you said, you go through life. I mean, anyone's life. This happens to everyone. Stuff happens that's just really difficult, really emotional. But then you have these other things that you need to do at the same time, these practical things. You got to, keep taking out the trash, and you got to keep your finances under control. And is sometimes with finances specifically, it's this big complicated thing. It's something that people tend to have some baggage with. And so it's like you're being asked to manage finances during a time when you're so focused on something else, and it's just really, really overwhelming. And so that's my passion, is trying to relieve some of that stress from people when they are going through some sort of traumatic event and they have some financial decisions to make or some changes that they're going through, and they need help with that. And the way that I got into that is I've been a financial advisor for quite a few years, but I was in what I would say traditional wealth management space. So I worked for the big companies. There were account minimums to work with us. So if you wanted financial advice, you needed to bring over several $100,000 in order to even qualify. And so, as you can imagine, that excludes a huge part of the population. It's only a small percentage of people that actually have a couple $100,000 laying around that they can move to an investment firm. So I only worked with the kind of top end in terms of net worth. And I always really enjoyed working with women, and I especially enjoyed working with women in transition. So I worked with, several widows and several divorcees, and I always felt like I could do the best work for them, and they needed the most help. And you can make a really significant difference in a short amount of time by helping relieve some of their financial stress when they're already stressed about other stuff. So I always kind of knew that I liked that, and I knew that I gravitated towards that. But it wasn't until I went out and started my own firm that I had the freedom to just work with people in that group. And so when COVID happened, I decided to start my own firm, and I just work with divorcees and widows. And that has been the best shift ever. It's just been, I can't even believe it's my job. I made up a job, and it's the best thing ever. But the reason why I identify with women in transition so much is because I was and kind of am a woman in transition myself. So I, about 4 years ago, I found out I was pregnant, and then told my husband. And then the next day, he had a seizure, and he didn't tell me. He just went to the ER. He didn't want to tell me because he didn't want to we were all excited about being pregnant. And so he didn't want to ruin it. And so he didn't tell me. And he went to the ER, and they did an MRI, and they saw that he had a brain tumor. And he ended up telling me eventually, but we weren't super concerned because he had a brain tumor when he was young. It wasn't a particularly scary brain tumor. They took it out. It had been many, many, many years since it had come back. And so they scheduled his surgery, and we didn't quite make it to the surgery because they scheduled surgery for 6 months later. He had a grand mal seizure a couple months later, and the tumor was twice as big as it was 2 months before. So it was clear that it was not the same type of tumor that he had when he was young. And so they did a surgery, did the pathology, and he had grade 4 glioblastoma, which is the worst type of brain cancer you can have. During this time, I'm pregnant. getting more and more pregnant every day with twins, by the way. They turned out to be twins. Just, it was like every twist and turn, there was something. So we're going through his treatment and everything while I am pregnant with twins. I have the twins, and then my health goes sideways because of, complications with that. And it was just this wild time, and we got through it. And he is doing quite well. It's been 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah, he has not had any recurrence of the tumor since he finished his treatment, which is really, it's pretty unusual for a glioblastoma.
Yeah.
Glioblastoma, people usually live, kind of best case scenario, it's like 18 months from diagnosis.
Yeah.
And he's at 4 years, and he is like, you wouldn't know, other than the scar on his head, that he had any issue. So through that whole experience, there's the emotional stuff, there's the fear, there's all the stuff. There's like, oh my God, now we have 2 kids on top of this. But life goes on. We have to figure out, okay, how does he file for disability insurance? Okay, we need to get our estate planning documents in order. And I went out on disability for, being pregnant, and like there were all these like financial things that were happening that had to be dealt with, and those were like major financial tasks or decisions that had to be made. And I'm a financial advisor. So this is my job. And it's still so overwhelming. And especially when you're doing it at this time when you're so freaked out about something else. And so I was like, oh my God, if I didn't have that background, this would be really scary. The idea of managing finances either on my own or for the family or whatever happens, like the idea of handling the finances alone could be very, very scary if I wasn't already comfortable with the financial part. And I just thought, like, how much worse would that be if I didn't have that background? Because most people in my position don't have that background. And they're worried about, how is my family going to eat? How am I going to afford our mortgage? Or if there's like these other huge problems on top of other huge problems. And I'm just like, the financial stress is something that I can help with. That's something that I can take off of their plate to a certain extent. I can't make money appear where there was no money, but I can help guide them through decisions. I can help with planning. I can tell them, this is what you need to do now. This is what you can do later. And so I felt like I feel like I have that gift that I can give people. And I have the unique perspective of being a financial advisor and being someone who has gone through something so unexpected.
Yeah.
And so that's what that's how I ended up here. That's my story.
So it's really wild for me because my story is very similar, but I've worked in oncology for 20 years. And then I was diagnosed with cancer. And I had the same thing where I'm like, how does anybody else who doesn't know the medical terminology know what it means to go through treatments, what the treatments are, what the treatment plan is, how to pick your doctors, where to park, how to get coffee, right? Like all of that. I found myself still completely overwhelmed, even though I was being treated in the hospital that I worked at for years.
Wow. That's amazing.
So I had the same experience of like, if I feel this way, how does anybody else get through this?
Yeah.
So I can completely relate with what you were saying. And for me, it had me pivot. And that's why I became a coach. So exactly it's completely resonating with me. Now, first and foremost, I'm happy that you're well. Your husband is a walking miracle because GBMs are just
horrible,
devastating. Yeah. And so please, when you see him next, just squeeze him for me.
I'll tell him this one's from Lori.
Please do, because I understand. And I apologize if, of course, they're mowing lawns out right outside. Can you hear that?
I can hear it. I thought maybe an airplane was taken off.
I wish I was going somewhere. So I apologize to everybody for that. I will mute myself as much as I can. But so one of the things that most of us do not realize, I would love to talk 2 things. One, the cost of treatment is always a huge concern. Like I know my chemotherapy is $14,000 a month. And if I didn't have insurance, I don't know what I would do. So can you speak a little bit about that, about how you support people with that?
Yeah, I can tell you firsthand that the costs of an illness like that are so much more than you think, because yeah, there's the treatment. And if you don't have insurance, it's like the most ridiculous amount you could ever, it's just absurd. You've got surgeries, you've got radiation, you've got chemo, you have all the medications, you have all this stuff, the occupational therapy, all this stuff. And even with our excellent insurance, it was still expensive. And I was taking time off of work to drive him to and from radiation because he wasn't supposed to drive. And my work was extremely flexible and supportive during that whole thing. And it could have, I can't imagine if I wasn't with them, how much more difficult that would be. But most people can't just be like, oh, hey, I got to go sit in the hospital all day because my husband's having surgery. And then I'm not really going to be in until like noon every day for the next 6 months because I have to take him to, radiation. Like that could have resulted in a job loss for someone, I'm sure, or a reduction in their income. There's all these other costs that you have to think about. And luckily he didn't require any care. Like when even the day he came home from the hospital, I mean, he was in the ICU for several days. And the day he came home, he's like, I don't need help. I don't need anything. I'm fine. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have a panic attack watching you walk up the stairs. Cause his left side was kind of not working so well after surgery for a little while. But if we had needed caretakers, that could be extremely costly. And like, it can be financially devastating to a family. And it might be an illness that's kind of temporary. It might be a terminal illness. There's all sorts of different situations, but it can just devastate you financially for a long time. It's really scary. And so I work with people. In my normal work, I don't work with too many people who are in the midst of an illness, but I do volunteer financial planning for families afflicted with cancer, whether, whoever in the family has it. And that's something we have to plan for is all of the out-of-pocket costs that come along with treatment. And those costs are there, whether they have great insurance, whether they have no insurance. It's like, no one is unscathed financially from this type of situation. So I've, helped people kind of navigate that when they're in the midst of it. But in my position now, where I'm working with women who have lost a spouse or they're, divorced or whatever, my focus is like, let's get you prepared in case something else unexpected happens. Because once some bad thing happens to you once, you're not like off the hook for the rest of your life. Like things can still happen and you still have to be prepared for these situations. And so I really encourage them being as prepared as they can by having a good emergency fund and making sure that they understand how their health insurance works, making sure that they understand any life insurance coverage that they have or disability coverage. So I'm really obsessed with preparing for the unexpected, not in like a really morbid way, but hey, let's just take care of this so you don't ever have to think about it again. And then if you do have to think about it, if something bad happens, you're covered. So I'm just like, let's just cross that off the list right now. So that's a big focus for me.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So, for newly diagnosed people, what would be one of the things that you would say is a must do? Because you have so many great ideas here, but what would be like the first thing for them to, assess? Is that like how much money they have? Like, how do you start this process for people?
So I would say do a complete inventory of your finances. And this is not something that you're going to do in an hour. This is going to be a big project, but you need to understand every part of your financial situation. So you need to look at all of your accounts that you have, any checking and savings, any investments that you have, any retirement accounts that you have. You need to look at all of the debts that you have. So if you have a mortgage, if you have student loans, if you have auto loans or credit card debts, you need to understand what you owe. Understand how much money you have coming in after tax. And, you need to understand your cash flow and how much it costs just to cover your basic needs. And then you kind of need to figure out, okay, if we're going to have to cut from somewhere, what are the areas that we can kind of, reduce our spending in certain areas. And then getting a really good idea of all of your insurance policies. And insurance policies are not fun to read. They're really long and they're really confusing, but you can get someone to help you, but you need to understand all the details. So with your life insurance policy, who is the beneficiary and what would they get if something happened to you? And then if you become disabled, how long do you have to be disabled before it starts paying you an income? And how much of your salary is it going to replace if you go out on disability? And then with the healthcare coverage, like understand what your out-of-pocket costs will look like and understand that there's going to be much more than what it is probably originally estimated when you're looking at this kind of stuff. So you just you need to start by just, okay, where are we right now? And once you get a good grip on that, then it's like, okay, then we can make a plan going forward, but you have to understand your current financial picture.
And then what would be something that you would tell somebody? So say somebody's in a part where they may not have insurance, they may not have enough money to cover, are there some resources available for them out there, including yourself, right? Clearly, that they would be able to go to that they may not be aware of?
So it depends. So if the assistance that you're looking for is like financial assistance, like trying to get money, there are special programs that give grants to families that have, cancer or other illnesses or whatever. And then there's also financial planners who do pro bono financial planning for people in that situation. And you might have to do a Google search, but they're definitely out there. The organization that I have worked with is called Family Reach, and you can apply to work with an advisor. You can apply, I think they have those grants. It might not be through Family Reach, but it's like, that would be a really good place to start. But I'm sure there are other organizations like that. But don't give up and think, oh, well, I can't afford advice, or I can't qualify for this. Like, you might need to do some digging on the internet, but there are organizations that help people just like you.
And then one of the things that we were talking about before we started recording was the fact that you have a 5-tip freebie that you have available. Would you like to share a couple of the tips that you have from there if you haven't already?
Yeah, so I have a little ebook that I put together, and it's for newly single women, and it's not just newly widowed or whatever. It's just like a woman that's managing their finances alone all of a sudden by themselves, and it's mostly things you should do right away to kind of get a grip on your finances. And I can't remember on the spot. I'm like, oh my God, what are they? But it's like,
so you love when that happens because you know them, but I just put you on the spot. I'm so sorry. So guys, those of you listening, she has this really great ebook that has five different tips on what to do when you're newly single.
Surprise. I'm trying to build suspense. So I'm not gonna tell you what they are, but they're just things like, reviewing. It's stuff like we talked about, reviewing your insurance policies and things like that. It's but they're good tips. So yeah. Check it out.
I love it. Now, there's so many questions that I have for you. So we've covered, what to do in the beginning, what, some of the resources, including yourself, right? You're the founder of True Worth Financial Planning. So that is how people can definitely find you. And then, one of the things too that we kind of don't take into account, or we do, but we kind of don't, like you were saying, prepare for everything. So I remember the day when my parents came to us and it was like, okay, we planned like where we want to be buried and we got our grave sites and all this stuff. We're like, you guys are crazy, right? But now that I'm a little bit older, I understand why they would do something like that. Really prepare for the things that you can prepare for. And then just when unexpected things happen, then definitely reach out to a professional like yourself to get some support around that. One of the things that we also talked about that I am very curious is especially the uninsured people. I don't know if you can speak to what they can do. I know for myself, right? I always say that I'm whenever somebody asks me, oh, you look really great. Yeah, it cost me, $250,000 for, where I am now to be living with you. How do you speak to somebody who is like really, let's face it, right? Finances sometimes are really stressful for people.
Yeah.
Some people may be paycheck to paycheck. A lot of us are, especially when we're in the middle of fighting something. So what would be something that you can tell them? Maybe some reassurance on how to get through that moment in time.
Well, if you're uninsured, I don't have specific experience. I mean, I've only gone through this myself with excellent insurance. So that's a big disclaimer. Like I'm like best case scenario in terms of financial situation to go through that. But like the problem is, if you're on, you qualify for Medicaid if you don't have enough income, and if if you can't get your own insurance, and you have to understand that you're not going to have the flexibility to go to whatever specialist on the other side of the country that you would otherwise go to. Like, you're just not going to have the same access, and that's not fair. That's not right. It's not fair, but that's the way it is. And knowing that, you just have to be an advocate for yourself. And this is something that I learned during my health stuff, and then my husband's as well. Like, you go and you show up at the doctor's office and they tell you, oh, you have this thing, and they have a plan for you. They have like the standard of care that they take you through, but it's not their job to look out for your best interests. I know that sounds really weird because they're medical professionals, but our neuro-oncologist, his job is to manage the treatment of the tumor. His job is not to manage the impact on other parts of our lives. Each person has their job and they kind of stay within their own lane, and they're not going to step out of their lane to help you. I wish that wasn't the case, but we all have a job and we can't do everyone's job. So you have to advocate for yourself, and you have to demand things. If you know something's not right, or you need something, you need to be the squeaky wheel and just annoy people until you get what you need. And if the costs, you just have to fight for everything. I mean, you have to fight to get to the best care. And if you're incurring these costs, you have to fight to get help with that. And it's not going to be easy. And I'm not saying that if you don't have any money and if you don't have any insurance, you're going to get access to the same care, but you will get treatment. You just have to fight for what you need. And I know that doesn't really answer your question.
No. And what's coming to mind from what you're saying is, I remember as well, I went through this journey with insurance, so I can't speak to not having insurance, but I remember there being like copays and all this stuff that you need to cover. And somebody once said to me, because I'm one of those people, I just like to pay stuff off. I hate having stuff lingering. So I was taking money out of my savings and I was just paying off what I needed to pay off. And I remember somebody saying to me, you could pay them $5 a month as long as you're providing them something, you won't be delinquent. Right. And I was kind of like, oh, okay. Right. And it was like after I already spent thousands of dollars to cover my deductible. I'm like, I wish I would have known that sooner. But would that be something that you would advise people to do? Like, it's okay to kind of have a little bit of a balance going through this process and don't get so stressed out that you need to pay it off all at once.
Yeah. So a lot of that stuff is negotiable.
Okay.
And that's not something that's advertised because, as you can imagine, those people want to get paid. But if you go to them and you're like, look, I don't have the money, they're not going to let you die. They're not going to withhold life-saving treatment because you can't pay them. You're going to have to work something out with them. And you'd probably be surprised at how willing they are to work something out with you. So you need to do what you need to do to get better. And you will have to deal with the consequences, but those consequences there might be a lot of relief that's available to you. So don't not pursue whatever you need because you think, oh, this is going to cost my family or whatever. Like you do what you need to do. And then you're just going to have another fight later with
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's worth it. It's worth it. It's your life and it's your health, and you do whatever you have to do to protect yourself and protect your family.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially when you're going through something, even, divorce, illness, whatever it is, you kind of don't know how things are going to end up. So I love the fact that you're a resource available to people to kind of sort through, where they are, what they're going to need in their future, and really just be a great resource for people. So tell me, how can people find you?
So you can visit my website. It's trueworthfp.com, which it's F as in Paul, P as in Frank, or F as in financial, P as in planning. So my website has information on my services, and it has ways that you can contact me. Social media is also a great way to keep in touch. So I'm very active on Instagram. It's at trueworthfp. And I'm always posting information. I post interviews. I'm always doing something. And I love to hear from people. And even if it's not a good fit for me to work with them, I'm here to help, and you can call me and you can set up a meeting and ask me questions. And I'm always going to be happy to talk to people, even if it's not something that I can necessarily help with myself, but I have, some resources in my back pocket. And I know of a lot of other advisors who feel the same way and who do pro bono work. And so, reach out, and I'd be delighted to be a resource in any way that I can.
Yeah. Or that's wonderful. And like you said, you have a network of other people too, that if it's something that you're not able to support somebody with, you could definitely refer them to somebody else. I love what you're up to. I think that you are very needed. I think a lot of us were like, man, we wish we knew about you sooner. And so, definitely everybody listening, please make sure to visit Rachael's website and get yourself that download for her 5 go-to tips on how to really support yourself and empower yourself financially. Rachael, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Lori, for having me. I appreciate it.